Welcome to the one-on-one interview show from AutoHub Show Media, and let's get started.
Hello there, this is Ian Nethercott with the AutoHub Show. This is not live, this is the one-on-one interview show, and we have Rusty West with us, who's got an interesting backstory, especially if you're in the, on the leasing side of the car business, which we all know is coming back based on cost of vehicles, but also monthly payments. I've even heard talk from Donald Trump that we're going to import these 57 horsepower K cars from Japan to sort of make an aspirational smart car a reality in 2026, which I thought was pretty funny. Being that smart cars, I think the original one in North America was diesel, and I think it had about 68 horsepower. So these have less horsepower, but they're more importantly, they're 2/3 scale of a Honda Civic, circa like 1985. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens there. But Rusty, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about sort of why the car business, but more importantly, on the leasing side, it sounds like you have experience from the early days. Maybe you can share a little bit about what's changed in your opinion on the lease front, because that's obviously how people make cars affordable.
Sure. Thanks for having me, first of all. These things are always kind of fun. Auto leasing in the U.S., I've been in that space, or was in that space from 1988 until 2023, is very cyclical, and it seems like it's a 7-year cycle.
Right.
We had a pretty downturn cycle through COVID and all the rest of just now motor space in general.
Yep.
The interest rates are so high, cars are so expensive that it's getting to the point where it's very difficult for consumers to afford a nice vehicle.
Yeah.
And there's a bunch of different schools of thoughts. I'm always a big believer in that consumers' behavior is kind of dictated by how much upfront, how much a month for how many months, right? Because they care about how much they pay for a car, but at the end of the day, the amount that they actually pay for the car, if they can't afford the payments, it doesn't matter. And if they pay seemingly a whole lot for the car, but they get a screaming deal and they can afford the upfront and the payments.
Yeah.
And it makes sense for them, then maybe they'll take a more expensive car. So, and with the lease, if you get a good structure on a lease, you can have a much more affordable payment than on a purchase. My dad was in the car business long before I ever met my mom. He was kind of the godfather of modern day auto leasing.
Oh, okay.
He wrote Ford retail lease plan, they called RLT, which became the Red Carpet lease. He had the first independent leasing company in the country. He put all the banks and everybody in the leasing business. When I graduated college, I wrote a software package for his leasing company called Lease Profit, P-R-O-P-H-E-T.
Mm-hmm.
And it was for him. We realized we could have something we could sell. He had a partner who did some really shady stuff. His partner ended up embezzling a bunch of money and going to the penitentiary. And so we started off completely broke and went in the software business together in 1988. And I ran it. He passed away in 2005. We were partners throughout his whole life, but in 2000 he got pretty sick, so he wasn't involved with the business. About 2000 on. And I sold the company in 2023 to S&P Global.
Okay.
So I'm not engaged with the company anymore. I still kind of keep tabs on what's going on, but that's kind of the super short of it. The little bit longer of it is when we did Lease Profit, the premise of Lease Profit was trying to figure out, okay, what's the very best lease structure package out there for any given scenario. In order to calculate that, we had to track all of the information from every lending institution in the marketplace, for every car, for every market, for every dealer that was on our platform. And that included all rebates and incentives, taxes, registration fees, and then all the stuff, rates, residual values,
right.
Markups, there's a zillion elements that come into it.
I was a lease manager, so I know a little bit about it.
Oh, okay. So you know how complicated leases can be, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny. When I was lived in Vancouver for 25 years, I was visiting one of the Tesla locations because I've been studying them since I think the closest one was Seattle when I first started looking at them. But I was in there and I was like, okay, you guys got this Model 3 and you're doing a lease, so tell me more about the lease. And they said, well, it's a forced return lease and this is the payment and here's the rate. I said, okay, so what's the residual? Oh, we don't know. Okay, so how is that structured? Oh, we don't know. And I'm like, oh, okay, so you're leasing those though. Oh yeah, we do a lot of leases. I'm like, oh, okay, great. So you have no understanding of what leasing is. You don't know what's going to happen when it comes back. You have no idea what that looks like. You're just selling Teslas, right? And he's like, what do you mean? I go, well, there's a couple questions. He says, what are those? I said, number one, like, what's the residual? I know I can't buy it, but I still need to know how that's structured. Number two, what's the carrying cost? Well, what does that cost me to carry that? Number three, what's the payment interest rate and how are you structuring that? And more importantly, what's the cap cost? Well, I don't know. I'm like, okay, well, when you know, let me know. Yeah, I mean, when you look at even cell phones today seem to be on a monthly payment plan. But the thing that was, I guess, interesting to me, going back 25 years when I first started in the car business, at least in my generation, my family's been in it over 100 years, but what surprised me when I first started getting into leasing and explaining leasing to every single customer, because my view was give everyone the option to lease. You know, it was shocking to me how few people understood leasing, but more importantly, how rarely it was presented. I bought a car 3 or 4 months ago, and they pulled out this Foursquare from like 1983, and I'm like, I've been in the car business 25 years. Like, I understand you got a tool that works for you that is a little obsolete, but wouldn't you ask questions instead of an interrogation style, like how the person wants to pay for the car and what are the options? But what surprises me as we look at fractional ownership, we look at like Vibo, and we look at Uber, and we look at Tesla, and to your point, the historical leasing. I mean, I remember, I think it was 2003 or 4 when General Motors got into a whole bunch of trouble just setting residuals way too freaking high. And I'm sure that'll also happen with Tesla. There's going to be a lot of used Teslas that, you know, they're going to want to unload. But what's your feeling on maybe fractional ownership or different ownership? There's been a lot of talk about subscription models, a lot of talk about features. I mean, obviously there's companies like Slate and others who are saying, hey, let's get back to the basic pickup, or let's get back to the basic car. I mean, what's your thinking there? Do you think those millennials, Gen Z, Alpha will change the way cars are bought? I mean, what do you think?
So I think they might change the type of cars that are bought. I don't think that that the subscription model, the fractional ownership theory is, I think from the get-go is doomed and flawed, right? The depreciation curve is so rapid that it's the financial model doesn't seem to work. There have been lots of companies that have raised hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars to try and make it work, and they've never turned a profit, and they've burned through just crazy amounts of cash. So I might be wrong on that one, but I think the popular opinion is that, you know what, there are other structures of transactions that might work. Balloon notes are kind of popular in certain markets. Leasing, obviously, I'm a big proponent of. I've kind of been in that space forever and ever and ever. But also, depending on the consumer and the generation of the consumer, like you said, you know, I'm a car nut. When I say I'm a car nut, I got warehouses full of cars all over the place. And I like nutty stuff.
Yeah.
A lot of the younger generation don't look at a car as, hey, that's really cool. They look at a car as it's a tool, it's a mode of transportation, even from point A to point B. Maybe I need to haul some stuff or whatever. So I think we will see some less expensive builds coming out, cars that are more targeted towards that demographic, if you will. But regardless of whether it's a less expensive vehicle or more expensive vehicle, there are a multitude of transaction types that might fit a particular person's budget better than another, right? And
yeah, I mean, I'm looking at Slate, but I'm also looking at self-driving, and I know self-driving is probably still 3 to 5 years away if we can get rid of the accident problem. But, you know, if I have a vehicle, and let's just say that vehicle's idle 80% of the time, if I can build a fractional ownership model around that, and I can get people to agree on it, I think there's an option there. But the other thing that I think you hit right on the head is if I look at Gen Z, I look at Alpha, I look at even younger millennials, they sort of attach a car to something like this. They're like, oh, it's got this cool feature, it does this, it does that. I mean, I saw a car reviewer who generally reviews technology, review an electric car from China, and he was much more infatuated with the way the car connected to his phone and device and what he could do with that from a performance point of view on the car than he was on the car, which I thought was really interesting, just because when you look at channels like Supercar Barbie, to pick a random one, or, you know, Cars Yeah, which interviews a lot of people that are true car people, being that I've been one a long time. I'm much more interested in, say, those the design elements, the
Mm.
the Moreau kind of, he reviews those, the guy from Cars and Bids reviews these cars that are kind of wacky, and he does it in an interesting way. But the vast majority of people, much like with a cell phone, just they want the cell phone. They don't really know the difference
Right.
between this one and that one. They don't really know the difference between a manual and automatic. They don't really know the difference between different engine technology. I mean, there's going to be a big shift, I think, with solid state batteries. I know Toyota's talking again about this, but when you look at depreciation, and we talked a little bit about Tesla earlier, if I've got a forced return lease and I set the residual at 60% and then the depreciation is 80% on that car, I got a little bit of a math problem, and it's not a good math problem. So we'll see how that goes. But I think if anyone's proven that, and that would be General Motors, but even BMW these days, I think is in a little bit of trouble because they've always set the residual high to get that lease customer. But I think that is a dangerous game when you see accelerated depreciation. And I think the time we're in now with high used resale prices can't last forever. Sooner or later, you're going to have a problem to your 7-year cycle. What do you think?
Yeah, there's all great points. Historically, there have been more lending institutions than I can count who have put overly aggressive residual values on vehicles. General Electric, or GCal, General Electric Capital Auto Leasing, was huge in the leasing business a long time ago. And they got super aggressive with residual values, and then it sunk their ship. Chrysler Capital, which was at one time Ally Financial Chrysler Capital, I kind of have the same thing. General Motors has done it. A bunch of other lending institutions have done it. And, when you look at the process of doing it, it's all to influence consumer behavior, to try and get them to buy your widget. Right?
Yeah.
And you look at, there's other mechanisms that the manufacturers use to motivate consumers also by way of these big giant rebates and incentives and all that kind of stuff. One of the things that I think we will see, and hopefully we'll see it before too long, is when a manufacturer, that works with their captive lending institution, instead of putting a big rebate on a lease, they could add that rebate to the residual value, right? So it would have a very similar dynamic on the transaction as far as lowering the monthly payment.
Yeah.
But if the vehicle goes full term and gets turned in, the residual value, part of that residual value has already been paid, so to speak, because the manufacturer used those funds to subsidize the residual value as to just subsidize the purchase up front. And that's always been a fun one to talk to. We did a ton of consulting and analytics works with different lenders and manufacturers, and that was always one that we would pitch them on, and everybody was like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, but none of the lending institutions jumped in yet. So we'll see what happens.
When I worked for Nissan, I did a lot of work across Western Canada, so that was Winnipeg to the Yukon. And I worked with a lot of farming communities in Saskatchewan because there's not a lot of people, but there's a lot of farms. And the biggest challenge they had in that market was the dealers would sell a new Nissan to a customer, and then that customer would pay for it in cash because they had money from their harvest. And then 2 years later, they'd come back and they'd be pissed off about the resale value of it. And I said, well, why wouldn't you do a prepaid lease? They go, well, how does that work? It's like, well, just pay it up front. You pay half or whatever the residual was. And then in 2 years, you just change it. And they were like shocked that you could do that. But more importantly, they were very successful at it because the farmer was like, well, I'm coming back in 2 years anyway. And the last time I came back, I was pissed. So why not fix that? And it was interesting that you were talking about rebates because Lucid, who's backed by, I think, the Saudi Innovation Fund, they recently started doing tactics that were very similar to traditional car makers, like, oh, we're going to do a $4,000 rebate and 0% forever and this, that, and a bag of chips. And it was funny because I was like, well, they were different from their resale model or their retail model, but they're not different from a rebate point of view. They're still playing the same games, which I'm sure Tesla will be doing as well, just because they have these products that were hot and now aren't so much. What's your feeling on sort of the eating of different companies? I mean, we're seeing this with Netflix and other companies. We're seeing this now possibly with Honda and Toyota. Or not Honda and Toyota, Honda and Nissan. We're seeing this with other brands, possibly Stellantis buying other companies. And of course, there was that boondoggle when Mercedes merged with Stellantis, which was hilarious. But what do you think about the beating the Chinese by acquisition in terms of there being fewer car companies to compete versus better product?
Yeah, that's a space that I'm not too familiar with, right? I was more on the calculating the monthly payment side, but we've seen it over and over and over again. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I think anytime you have two organizations where they have, for lack of a better term, kind of a flawed culture, right? A lot of these guys, the manufacturer's culture is not fantastic, and you combine the two of them, it's a recipe for disaster, right? Which we saw with the Mercedes Stellantis.
Oh yeah,
Deal, right? But there,
and with Nissan a little bit.
Yeah, but there have been times when it's worked really well. Also, it's just I think a lot of it just depends on the culture and the kind of the vision of the two companies that are merging, and I don't think it's limited to automotive. I mean, it's you look at, especially in the tech space, when there's been so much consolidation in the tech space, and you get the big companies like Cox, for a while they were gobbling up everybody, but they weren't integrating them, so you end up with all these silos with people who aren't necessarily, internally even playing nice with each other. It's not good for the industry, but if you have the right culture and the companies merge, you can do some really great stuff, and it's really good for the industry. So
yeah, I mean, you may see that I hear with Home Depot and Lowe's, because Home Depot is bankrupt, so you may see a merger there, which is kind of interesting, especially as you see Amazon get into the car business. But I think the more important thing when you look at the EV side of the business, that was hot maybe 3-4 years ago. Now you're starting to see multiple failures. So I think what you will see is possibly the stronger of the group buy up the weaker as the traditional car makers abandon it because it's clearly not profitable. But more importantly, when you're looking at leasing specifically in the EV side, and obviously if you bought an EV a couple of years ago, if you leased it, you're probably a winner. But what do you think is going to happen with leasing in the EV space? Like, what do you think there?
I don't think that the lending institutions want it just yet, right? There's way too much unpredictability on what the value of these vehicles is going to be when they come back, and the lenders are scared, right? So, like you say, with ICE vehicles, we know what a car is going to be worth, kind of, 3 years from now, unless the world does something weird, the economy's wacky, or there's some, unrest and war and that kind of stuff that throws used car stuff off, and also anything that is either an overabundance of new vehicles or a shortage of new vehicles, that has a huge impact on the value of the used coming in. But at least we have lots and lots and lots of data on that, and it's fairly predictable. So the lenders are pretty comfortable with saying, okay, we think this car is going to be worth whatever, 55%, 60%, 43%, whatever. With the electric vehicles, the lending institutions don't know. And the ones who adopted leasing early and got aggressive about it and had these 60, 70% residual values on these cars, looking back in the cars were worth 25%, they got clobbered. And so I don't know that there's going to be a huge penetration in leasing in electric. And I think the limitations to it won't be because of consumer demand for it. I think it will be because of the appetite the lending institutions don't have for it because of the risk.
And what do you think on the used car side? Do you think the used car prices will normalize over the next, say, 12 to 18 months?
Used ICE vehicles or electric vehicles?
Just the vehicles in general. I mean, they've been acceleratedly too high generally. I mean, obviously ICE vehicles have held their value much better than electric, which I hear is something like a 70% depreciation metric. But what do you think on the used car prices? Do you think those prices will normalize as markets get back to normal run of things?
Yeah, I mean, there's always a correction, right? Right now, the certain vehicles in the used car market are bringing just ridiculous money, especially some of the I don't want to say the exotics, but the high-end sports cars that aren't like in the crazy exotic range. The high-end Porsches, GT3s, 911 Targas, anything with a stick shift, bringing nutty money. And I love to see that, right? Because I've kind of played with that stuff. But the other side to it is the electric stuff. I think is going to normalize also, but I don't think it's ever going to be real strong until they fix all the other elements of electric vehicles. I mean, the whole infrastructure issue, grid issue, all the rest of that kind of stuff, those are all challenges that have to be sorted out.
Man.
I'm a silent 50-50 partner in a small dealership in Southern California, and it's just used exotics, right?
Yeah.
We do all kinds of fun stuff. And we picked up is it the Taycan Turbo GT or whatever, the high-end Taycan. It was a 2-year-old car. It had 13,000 miles on it. Had a $180,000 window sticker when it was new. I mean, it was the big crazy one.
Yeah.
And we picked it up for like 42 grand. And I mean, for 42,000 bucks, what an unbelievable car. And we got a good body on it. Yeah. But I think we sold it for like 50. And that's nothing compared to how much it was new. And a 911, the same thing, same price. Yeah. Is worth window sticker still 2 years later, I mean, so it's crazy.
Did you see that DB5 that guy bought for 900 pounds last week? The story was out last week. I think he probably bought it a while ago, but he bought it from a wrecker or a yard for 900 pounds, restored it, sold it for $1.3 million. The guy who sold it to him had no idea what he had on his lot. So it was kind of interesting when you see those kind of stories where it's like, the first of this or the last of that. And I think, even though I think the younger people maybe not as into cars today as they once were, I think there's still going to be a subset of people that are going to get interested. I mean, I'm a car fanatic, so I buy cars all the time anyway. But it's more for an interest in it. I mean, I don't have a habit of anything else. But when I looked at there's a car collection in Tacoma, Washington, near the Tacoma Dome, that an individual donated the entire collection when he died. And I think it was 4,300 cars in the collection at the time. And I remember they were saying, well, his wife was like, well, what are we going to do with these things when you're no longer here? And it was just an interesting collection because he just collected stuff that he liked. And it was just a bizarre mix. The museum can't handle the entire collection at once. But when you look at, so they rotated, I believe. But when you look at car collections, I happen to be in Asia a couple of years ago in China, and I went to a car museum in Shanghai, and they had a bizarre collection of like Russian cars and then old American stuff and then Chinese copies of Russian cars and just a bizarre mix. But what was, I think, the most intriguing about it to me, being, North American based, but having traveled internationally, is car culture is everywhere. The question is, what will be the future of car culture? And I'm hoping it doesn't become that self-driving, cell phone-like thing that does all this stuff with the screens. I mean, there's a Buick minivan they're talking about launching next year, which is one up from the one they sell in Asia, which is basically like the limousine of minivans. And I'm going, who's going to spend $100,000 on a minivan? Like, I just don't see the market. I mean, I just don't get it. But, what do I know? I mean, this new Volkswagen electric van, that thing costs a fortune too. Like, I'm like, why did you not do a gas version or a hybrid version? I mean, Prelude, I don't know if you've seen the specs on the new Prelude, but I don't know what they're thinking. Like, I'm looking at it going, okay, it's a hybrid, but it's the price of a Nissan Civic Type R, but it kind of looks like a Civic Coupe, or kind of looks like a wannabe Porsche. I mean, it's like, what are you guys even doing? Like, I don't get it. Like, I'm shaking my head going, who is thinking here at all? It is crazy to me. So do you think design of cars is part of the issue?
I think there's a butt for every seat, so to speak. And I've been absolutely blown away how popular certain vehicles are that I look at. I'm like, if they sell two, they'll be lucky, and people gobble them up. Yeah. And I've also seen, and you've done the same thing where you've seen vehicles like, oh man, they've got a tiger by the tail. This thing's fantastic, and nobody wants them. Yeah, for sure. Design's always, I think, going to play a role. Design, form, function, but it depends on the buyer, right? Right. It depends on the generation of the buyer. I think one of these days, it won't be cars, it'll be autonomous drones that are taking us from point A to point B, right? Because they're already starting to work on some of that stuff, and some of the cities have a little bit of the infrastructure in place for it. And you don't have to have a performance car when you can go up a straight line and go back down, kind of thing. But I think there's always going to be a market for that kind of visceral driving experience, So I hope there is, because that's,
Well, I mean,
That'll make noise for me.
I always
So
think of that. I think it was that Star Trek reboot where the young Captain Kirk is stealing his dad's Corvette or something, and it's like, and the dad's like, bring that back right now. So it was kind of interesting. But to your point, when you look at flying cars and other things that are going on, I mean, there's a lot of movement on the drone side. There's even personal transportation. But you got to think about it and go, okay, in the early teens, that the planes were a new thing, but even though there's been advances to jet propulsion and other things, there hasn't been that much change in that space. And I think in automotive, even though we've gotten a lot more efficient with engine design and hybrid design and even electric propulsion, I think really that visceral engagement of the car is really what drives people to it, because it's not always a logical thing. It's not like buying gold that accelerates. It's not like doing those things. But how do you help dealers? I mean, you obviously worked in the software side. You worked in the leasing side. You have a lot of experience in the I guess the car nut community. I mean,
yeah.
What do you do now do you work with dealers? Do you help people with different things? Do you do consulting? What do you do?
So yeah, a little. I don't work directly with dealers. The last, I guess, kind of phoenix, if you will, of our company, Market Scan, we became a SaaS model. We had all the data for everything, for lease, finance, balloon, cash purchase transactions, for every vehicle, for every lender, for every manufacturer, for every inch of the country, for every dealer, right? So we got to where we were calculating just hundreds of millions of payments a day, empowering everybody.
Yeah.
So that was fun. You were talking about Amazon getting into the automotive space.
Yep.
And the payment and transaction structure that comes out of an Amazon deal is calculated by Market Scan, right? Or S&P Global now, right? I do a little bit. I got really heavy in the consulting space right after we sold with a few startups. That's not true. I tried to retire. I made it 59 days and went absolutely batshit crazy. And my wife is like, "Go buy yourself a job. Get the hell out of the house. You're driving me nuts." I go, "Yes, ma'am." So I consulted with a few companies, and there were startups. It wasn't for me. You'd have these meetings where you're like, "Okay, we're going to go do this," and okay, we got these 20 things we got to do. You divvy them up, and everybody great. And you get back together 2 weeks later and say, "Okay, you get everything done." So we did these 60 things, but none of them were on this list of the 20 things that we had to do. After a while, that didn't work. But there's a couple of kind of larger companies that are, I think, kind of getting past the startup phase and really transitioning into a growth phase.
Right.
That I've been talking with. I just spent 2 days in New York with one of them. Great company. It would be a lot of fun. So I'm going to work with them. But I haven't been doing a whole lot in the automotive space. I got really involved in the charity stuff was producing an air show, which that was all kinds of fun. Spent 2 years, getting all the military assets, a full-blown, the whole 9-yard air show. And 10 days before the air show, we had to cancel it because the government was shut down and the military assets were flying. So that was 2 years and lots of work. But we have a 10-year contract with the city of San Marcos and the airport. So we're doing it again next year and keeping doing it. But so I'm happy. I love talking with technology companies in the automotive space that have solved a big problem and are trying to figure out how to grow it. That part's always fun. So I've done a little bit of that, but for the most part, it's been kind of quiet on the automotive side for me since about this time last year.
So what's your feeling on AI in automotive? One of the sponsors of our show for 2026 is Numa. It's backed by a small company, startup actually, Google Technologies. But I was curious as to what you think. I know dealers are all over AI, but what you think's going to happen as we start to bolt on these AI solutions that start to work with maybe more traditional solutions like CDK and other companies? What do you think's going to happen there?
It's going to revolutionize everything. Right? I kind of went a little bit nuts right after I sold. I couldn't sit still, and I had this mobile app idea that I've always wanted to develop. So I bought a Macintosh. I've never done any Apple development, but I bought a Mac and and Xcode and all that stuff. And I developed the app and waiting for the patents to be issued before we launch it. And, my background is software. I programmed my whole life. So, but I spent 100 days developing the software package, and it would have taken me 3 years if it wasn't for AI.
Oh, yeah.
So it's unbelievable. And then like the one company that I'm working with in New York, they're really combining AI with the marketing efforts, right? Because it just gobbles up so much data. As long as the data that's going in is good, right? It's incredible what can happen and the suggestions that you can get. This is how you should, if you want consumers to jump all over this, right? Price it at $2.99 a month, right? Because the monthly payment, that's what of course the cash amount going to vary and all that kind of stuff. Like, that's nuts. So I think AI is going to drive all kinds of stuff. Next vehicle purchase, bringing them into the fold early, service stuff, you name it. I mean, it's like having a perfect employee who never takes a day off and works really fast.
Yeah, I mean, I've been impressed as I've looked at metrics for Numa. And if you're going to be at ADA 2026, I will be doing interviews at the show at their booth. But I've also been looking a lot at video creation tools lately, which are really interesting. But more importantly, to your point with data, if I'm a dealer and I'm working with CDK or Reynolds or Techion, pick your I guess camp, and I have data and the data is clean, there's an ability to really leverage talent. I know Ben Stock and the boys are doing this, but when I look at just metrics on the service side, let alone the sales side, if I can help a customer faster than my competition and better, 24/7, 365, I'll retain that service customer. So I think that the casualties will be those independent shops that used to fix cars because dealers dropped the ball. I think those companies are going to be in deep trouble. Like the Jiffy Lubes of the world, they're going to have a big problem when the dealer cancel all the phone calls and book all the appointments. So it's kind of interesting just because right now you're doing a lot of manual work, whether it be Xtime or Dealer FX or whether it be using different booking tools like a dentist, for example. But where I see the real upside is for big organizations like telephone companies and cable companies and streaming services that really right now can't handle, I guess, the negative calling, like the people that call and drive them nuts. But that, when I look at the data that I saw from Numa, was kind of interesting. So it can detect the voice intonation of the person who's calling service, for example, and then it can prioritize the entire team so that they line up with that person as needed. And I thought that was really interesting because when you look at Luanga Toda is one of their clients, the amount of efficiency, because they couldn't handle any status update calls at all. They just had too much call volume. But when you look at it and say, okay, I call 4 dealerships to service my Cadillac, and one answers, the other ones don't. I mean, basically, that's the dealership. And I think from a sales perspective, that's going to get really interesting. I mean, you were talking about Apple a couple of years ago. They implemented a system where basically you call them, it correlated your number to your account. They knew who you were before they picked up the phone. It wasn't perfect, but I think they were 5 years ahead of that curve, where it's like that personal service level. I mean, you can still fumble the ball, but at least it starts on the right conversation. And I think really the next 5 years are about to get real interesting because you're going to have to get that much better as an employee or a business owner or an entrepreneur, where basically you're ahead of the competition. What do you think on the, I guess, the staffing and tech side as they implement this tech? Do you think that the staff's going to get better, or do you think it'll be less of an issue?
From a tech stack standpoint?
Yeah.
I think it's going to change a bit, right? One of the things that I think is going to be super challenging, especially with the younger generation, especially the colleges and the younger generation, is how do we create curriculum for computer scientists now when it's so easy to, lack of a better term, cheat, right? I mean, you can go to Grok, which is Elon Musk's AI, super heavily weighted towards development. Right, so I leaned really heavily on Grok when I was developing this app.
Right.
And my son's a senior at Auburn, mechanical engineering student, and they encourage him, lean on the AI stuff. So I think what we're going to end up seeing is a hybrid of a new generation of technologists who have a really good understanding of developing software, and understanding the source code, but also really understand how to take advantage of the tools that are out there to crank stuff out quickly. And if they do that, then I think what we're going to see is a lot of technology companies that come out and kind of do what a Techion did, right?
Yeah.
The Techion kind of came out of nowhere. We started working with Techion when they had, I don't know, 10 employees, right? So all the payments come out of a Techion system, Marcus can calculate. And they did a lot of things really well. One of the things that is super challenging for any of the kind of add-on type technology companies when you start working with the CDK and the rental spaces is the data sets that exist are not normalized across the ecosystem, right? One dealership calls something one thing, so another dealership calls something another thing. So trying to normalize those transactions to be able to really understand them is very, very tough. I think AI will be able to help solve that problem because it's a mess. And the first company I think that does that really gonna shake things up, because then if you have massive amounts of normalized data, you can make some very intelligent decisions, and AI can gobble up data really quickly and look at it.
And I think the manufacturers, they have a benefit there too, just because they're trying to figure out what to build and what to sell and how to design and how to price it. And I think if they have the benefit of clean data from a dealership or dealer group or even region, they could really get ahead of that. And I think one of the things that is the biggest challenge for the OEM is, what do I build? Like, how do I price it? What features should I have? And I think a lot of it isn't just that. It's, okay, when I build it, what are people actually driving by? Like, what are they not driving and buying? And I think that will make it real interesting.
It's a big, it's a great comment. It's a huge puzzle to solve, all the different pieces, right? You look at it and you're like, okay, what am I selling against, right? So, if I'm Ford and I got my F-150 trucks, I'm selling against the C-1500 or Ram 1500 and whatnot. But I'm selling against levels of inventory, right?
Yeah.
If there's only 3 in a particular market with a super low monthly payment because there's a big rebate, it doesn't matter, right? I need to know that. I also need to know how dealerships are advertising those vehicles, because it doesn't really matter what my competitive manufacturer does from a marketing standpoint if it doesn't trickle down to the consumer, or if it trickles down to the consumer too much and they've got a super low monthly payment. Where am I going to be competitive, right? So when you look at this, you're like, okay, what content do I need to put in a vehicle? Well, in order to do that, we need to know what the consumer's desire is for content. Yep. We also need to know what the competitive products, how they're built out, right? And we need to know how the consumer views that transaction. And the consumer only views that transaction if he sees it through the eyes of the dealership, which is how the dealership is, the terms and conditions on which that dealership is willing to transact and how they're advertising that payment. So, it's this company that I was talking with in New York, they're kind of attacking that whole thing, because they do a lot of work with the OEMs and the lenders, but you have to look at the holistic view, right? And a lot of times, I remember 15 years ago, we got in the analytics space, well, we need to know what the national average is of the rebates for these. And I'm like, why? Of every consumer who's ever bought a vehicle in the history of selling vehicles, do you think anyone have ever asked, what's the national average of the rebate and incentive and payment on this thing? They want to know, how does that impact me, right? Yeah. How does it impact my family, right? So look at it in the markets that you want to attack, figure out where do you want to be there, right? And I don't need to be $300 a month cheaper than my competitor to earn the business. If $20 a month cheaper will get the business, I'm not pissing away $280 a month, right? Yep. Conversely, if I'm $100 a month more expensive, I'm sitting there scratching my head saying, I don't get it. My rebate's a little bit higher than theirs. Why aren't I selling any? Well, because your payment's too high and the consumer's not looking at the rebate. They're looking at how much they have to pay.
Yeah, I mean, I talked to a company that wants to do virtual test drives at dealerships with a rig. And ironically, about maybe 6-7 years ago, I talked to a company in, I think they were in Norway or Sweden. I think it was Sweden. So they developed a small electric car that kind of reminded me of that old BMW Izeta kind of thing, but in the Swedish design language. And what they'd done is they'd partnered with local electronics retailers to do test drives in electronics retailers, so people are already coming in to play computer games or whatever. So it was like a rig where basically they'd share part of the revenue with that customer. And I think that was kind of interesting. But to your point, and going back to the Foursquare, like the reason they use that tool is because people can only focus on one thing. Like, is it the trade? Is it the price? Is it the payment? But what they miss on that, and that's an old school technology, what they miss on that, and this was something I always took advantage of when I sold cars, was people buy cars based on options and payments, not on price, not on rebates, not on discounts, not on trade value. They're going, hey, like, distill it down to the thing for me. Distill it down to what I got to pay monthly. What does that look like? Kind of similar to the way politicians break complex concepts down to taglines. Sure. And I think that's something that I think AI will help with. But more importantly, when you look at sites that compare, say, credit card rates, where they say, okay, I don't know what credit card I want to buy. There's 20 options. Which one should I look at? You could do the same with cars. And actually, a gentleman we had on the show, he's big into the AI space at Austin, Texas. He said, what if you go into ChatGPT and say, okay, I want this type of car. Which car should I buy? What's the features on the car? What's the price point? What's the payments? What colors are available? And where are they? And I think that's what people are going to start to do, whether it's using text or whether it's using voice. And that's going to change not only how cars are marketed from an OEM and a dealer perspective, but also how customers find cars. Now, I don't think it'll replace that. I'm on a car lot. I'm here to buy this car, and then squirrel, I buy that one. But it will change the way customers find dealerships, but more importantly, select vehicles. And I think that's gonna implode the whole brand dynamic. I was talking to someone on Monday's show. She happened to be a Mercedes customer, and the Mercedes customers messed up the service experience to the point where her husband was like, yeah, you're never going back there. You're never buying another Mercedes-Benz. I don't care. I'm not paying for that. So I think the correlation between data, customer experience, ease of buying, which Amazon's trying to get into, which I'm sure other people will as well. But at the end of the day, it's really about what that experience looks like when I'm receiving the car, if it's delivered to me, when I'm picking it up at a dealership, when I'm servicing the car. And that to me is kind of the unknown. I think that's where things are really going to get interesting, whether it be a hotel chain, an aircraft company, a car company, a restaurant experience. I mean, I think you're seeing this even at McDonald's, to pick a random place where people are going, well, I'm paying $20 for this Big Mac meal and I used to pay $10 for, and I can go to like Chipotle and get the same food for the same money. Why am I going to McDonald's? And I think a lot of that is going to be real interesting as people start to go, well, is it really worth $20?
Yeah.
Like, it's crappy. I know it's crappy. I like it, but is it $20 or is it $15?
Sure.
And I think that's really interesting as you look at, say, like robots making it or whatever it might be. And I think China and Japan are doing that now, where they're like got baristas and a bunch of other things doing things. But I remember years ago being into a Starbucks, and they had just launched their breakfast sandwich at the time. And the Starbucks employee I was talking to was very upset. She was like, oh, I'm making these breakfast sandwiches and this and that. And I said, you work at McDonald's, right? She goes, what do you mean? I go, well, the logo's different, but it's the same. You're selling coffee and donuts. You're selling coffee and breakfast sandwiches. You're selling coffee and cookies. It's not a cafe, okay? It's a fast food restaurant with a green logo. I mean, that's what it is. And I know people are paying more for fancy cheese or whatever, but the example I always use is Five Guys. And I saw this on, I think it was on YouTube. And the guy was talking about how he started this burger chain with his sons. He says, you guys can go to college or I can start this burger chain. And the burger chain is the simplest model ever. And he built one that was successful. And then he went to the bank and he wanted more money. And they're like, do you have marketing? He's like, no. Do you have packaging? No. Do you have offers? No. What are you doing? He goes, well, I just do burgers and fries. And I just do them better than anyone else. And people show up. And they're like, what?
Yeah.
They're like, we're not loaning you any money. We're not loaning you any money. You are crazy. You are a crazy person.
Yeah. You mentioned, that it's kind of hard to address the guy comes on a lot to look at one thing and then you look up and he lays at something else.
Yeah.
Right? There's always historically been kind of three types of car buyers, right? There's a guy who knows exactly what he wants, right? You got this red
Yeah.
Camaro convertible. I've been dreaming about it for 2 years. Make me a deal on it. You've got the guy who comes in is looking at something, and ooh, a bunny gets something else.
Yeah.
And there's a whole other generation that's like, hey, look, I got a couple grand up front, and I want to pay between $350 and $400 a month. What can I drive?
Yeah.
Right. Here's my credit. Here's whatever. What do you have on your lot that I can drive? And then give me some options. And if you do it right, you have the ability to address all three of those.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Right. Where it really becomes challenging is if it takes you forever to tell them that, right? You know, I'll be right back, and you sit them at a table, and they're sitting there, by themselves for 40 minutes while your sales manager's trying to figure this stuff out, as opposed to, like our ecosystem was all electronic, right? You had a tablet.
Yeah.
What are you interested in? Okay, well, I like this car. What are the payments? Okay, well, here's let's run your credit, right? Which they can do, get it right there. And they go, here's 16 lease options, here's 16 finance options, and here's a cash purchase option. What best fits your budget, right? And then all you're trying to do is get them to eliminate 32 of the 33 options, right? And then focus on that. But you also have hey, this is what you're looking for. Okay, here's the different cars you can drive. Which one do you want to go test drive, right?
Yeah.
And if you can put your salespeople in a position where they never leave the consumer unattended during their new car buying experience, it's a way different transaction than when they're sitting there alone for 75 minutes, 10 minutes here, 5 minutes there, 12 minutes there, right?
Yeah.
And
well, if you're ever in Beaverton, Oregon, there's a Toyota dealer. I think it's called Beaverton Toyota, and they developed a process called Clear. So the process is tablet based. They sit down with the customer, they figure out the car, and then they configure all the payments right in front of the customer. They don't have to talk to the manager; they can do it themselves. If the customer doesn't want to buy today, that's no problem. They can email the whole thing to them. They can do it at home. And I basically did that almost 15 years ago, but with paper. So what I do is I land on the right car, the car they wanted to buy, and said, okay, so there's different ways to buy it. Here's a finance option. Here's a lease option. Here's a cash option. Here's a couple different variations. Which way do you want to do that? And people would just select on it like they would on a menu. Like I want the burger with fries. I want the hamburger with cheese. I want the chicken sandwich. It's the same thing, but the mistake a lot of car dealers make, not to beat them up, is they focus on discounts. They focus on trade value. They focus on accessory sales. They focus on F&I sales. Don't do any of those things. Just focus on getting the right car and the payment that works for the customer. But that's what I think is the mastery of what Techion was doing with integration. But I'd love to talk more, but I think we're out of time. But I appreciate the time, and of course, if you have questions about leasing, or you want some consulting, or possibly have questions about the car business from a technology point of view, or even other businesses from a technology point of view, Rusty is an expert on the technology side, and he's got industry experience, so I'm sure he knows a little bit about it. Details will be below. Thanks very much for taking the time today. I really appreciate it. And we'll talk to you soon. If you're going to be at NADA 2026, I will be at the NUMA booth, so I'd be happy to see you at the show. Thanks for taking the time, Rusty.
Thanks for having me. It was fun.
No worries. My pleasure. Second, what am I doing here? Oh, I got to go over this side. Doo-doo-doo.